Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Friday, July 8th installment of the Silicon Insider, the only uncensored look at life and business in the Valley. My name is Mike Malone, and I'm here with special contributor Scott Budman, technology reporter for NBC Bay Area. Our producer is Jordan Henderson. Our East Coast correspondent is Bob Grove. And our host, as always, is the Silicon Valley Business Journal. Okay, well, we got to start with the economy. We were talking the last few weeks, takes 2 full quarters of negative growth to go into a full-blown recession. Well, I think we're now here. This is the terrible thing about inflation-driven recessions. Stagflation, you can't stop it. It just seems to keep moving down the hill. And if you try to fix one thing, like try to save the stock market, then interest rates go through the ceiling. And if you try to hold back interest rates, then inflation goes out of control. You're just plain whack-a-mole. And you have to come out the far side, and you don't know how far away the far side is.
Yeah, we've been seeing so many factors happen at the same time. And I think what's really sticking with people now are just how expensive everything is. Costs are way up. Obviously, we've talked about that, and we've seen that now for months. What we haven't seen yet, and I'm a little surprised at this, are the widespread layoffs that often come with both a rise in prices, but also, and that curbs consumer demand, but also the really, really big drawback in stock valuations that we've seen. And it seems like those two would be a killer to the market. But we haven't seen.
Where are the layoffs?
Right. And the unemployment rate, especially for Silicon Valley, for tech, what we talk about, is still extremely low. We've seen some layoffs. We've seen the trickle of layoffs, but we haven't yet seen the storm. And until we do, I don't know that at least this region will be feeling quite the knockout blow that you always feel when you have widespread layoffs.
Yeah, though when it comes, it comes. It may be delayed, but I don't see how we can be contracyclical to the entire world economy. I just, you hope and pray at least it won't, mitigate it somewhat, but you can't escape.
No, and our economy is going in that cycle. It's been going downhill for a while. We've seen prices rise. We've seen consumer demand fall. And it's the layoffs are really what get me. My big thing, what I track here in the Valley more than anything, is how many people are at work, how many people are going to a job, and that number is still very high, and that's encouraging. But people are still complaining about the high cost of gas, about the high cost of food, about even mortgage rates that are going up, making it even harder to buy a house here in the Bay Area. And once layoffs kick in, and it does seem, I agree with you, I don't see how we avoid more layoffs. That's really going to make everything much, much harder.
I've noticed certain key indicators. Driving around my neighborhood, going to get a coffee yesterday with my son, I saw one house for sale in about a 5-mile trip. And, that's very interesting, as if people are now pulling their houses off the market because they were enjoying the boom and getting, much greater offers than they were listing for. It all looked great. But now I think people are sensing that there's not going to be, good deals for sellers. It's going to turn into a buyer's market very soon now, that you're not going to get that 20% bid over your list price. And you're going to get a lot of people that are now saying, I don't think we'll just wait till the interest rates come back down in a year or so. I had a weird moment, 4th of July barbecue. I'm talking to an old friend, known for 30 years, former Army officer, executive at HP. And he, out of the blue, I said, "What's new?" He said, "I decided yesterday to sell my house. I've got to get out, because in another week or two, the interest rates are climbing so fast. If I don't get out now, I won't be able to get out for a long, long time." And he was going to sell his house. He had already talked to a real estate agent. In 24 hours, he had made that decision. And I wonder how many other people are looking around going, do we hunker down? Do we not make that sale? Do we try to sell, fire sale fast and get to Idaho or Oregon or something. I mean, I think there are a lot of conversations going on right now that we have not heard the resolution of.
And that's possibly true. My guess is the house will sell reasonably quick because there's just so little inventory on the market.
Right.
But you're right. We got used to a situation where you'd see multiple offers and bids well above the asking price. And with the NASDAQ taking such a hit here in the Bay Area, I don't think we're going to see that. So the house will sell. But, one concern that's been added to a potential home buyer is not only the prohibitively high cost of the house itself, but right, a mortgage rate that over the last several months has gone from 3% to 5% and creeping even higher. And in the last week or so, we've seen that draw back a bit, but it's still going to be a much larger monthly payment than you would have made even a year ago.
Yeah, and I wonder if the prices of homes are now kind of artificially high because so many people have backed off that what you said, the inventory levels are look really low on available homes. You used to get those flyers in the mail that had 80 homes for sale and and all of that. And like I said, I saw one for sale sign yesterday driving all the way from Sunnyvale to Santa Clara. And if those few houses are available, the people that have to come to Silicon Valley and to buy a house, they're going to still be bidding up, at least for a while, I think.
Well, and that's the paradox of the tech industry. How many people have to come to Silicon Valley? We don't even know that answer yet, because we don't know how many of these companies are going to say you have to be here in the future as opposed to remote. And all of those things not only change how our traffic patterns look, but they also change how the housing market is. And we know that some of the companies are saying, hey, come back here, and they're recruiting people to be here. But we also know that others are, even as a recruiting tool, saying, hey, you don't have to come here. You can be remote and you don't have to worry about putting down that giant down payment. And I still think that's because we're still in this. We're still in the pandemic. We're still in this weird flux employment-wise and job-wise, and we're in a really, really uncertain market. So there's a lot that's going to change over the next months and maybe even couple of years that we're just in flux right now with so many things at the same time.
Okay, now here's a weird one. You sent me this yesterday. Unexpected rental prices are back up. Now, why is that? San Francisco, one bedroom, averaged $3,000 a month. Now, we've been told everybody's moving out of San Francisco. Coming out of the lockdown, people are getting out and getting out of one bedroom apartments and getting into a more expansive life once again. How are rental rates up in the city? I don't get it.
Well, because I think that's an old narrative. I think people did leave during the teeth of the pandemic, but a lot of people came back, whether for the lifestyle, they want to be in San Francisco, or for their jobs that did want them back. But we're now seeing a rental market that once again is heating up. And I think San Francisco is now second or third to New York and maybe Miami in terms of most expensive place to rent once again. And it's, again, what we saw in the Bay Area, where people were able to go and still keep their jobs. But now they're coming back partially for those jobs, but also I think because they just missed it here. Remember, we've talked about this many times. It's something that drives me crazy, but the exodus out of California or the exodus out of the Bay Area has never really happened. And it's one thing to say that if you're on the East Coast looking in or whatever, but we've never seen during a non-absolute lockdown traffic patterns that are anything but totally stuck here. There's not enough of an exodus to make a difference. And so people coming back now, that market heats up, and all of a sudden it's $3,000 a month to get a one bedroom again.
Well, I mean, but San Francisco has suffered one of the worst negative PR campaigns over the last few years that I've ever seen. I mean, you get this, if you're sitting on the East Coast, you got to be thinking drug addicts sleeping in your doorway, needles your kids are stepping on going to school, feces, all this kind of stuff. You never hear about Baghdad by the Bay anymore, and yet people are flocking in still.
I mean, there is a strong tech presence. And obviously there's the culture, and there's, families that want to live there. But you're right. I've been amazed that especially young people who, have these skills, choose San Francisco if they're reading all the bad things. And, some of that gets blown out of proportion, but I've spent a lot of time in San Francisco, and some of it is not blown out of proportion. Some of it is absolutely true and absolutely disappointing. So that's something that, to her credit, Mayor London Breed speaks out about that a lot, but there doesn't seem to be a whole lot happening. And I know they just got rid of, Chesa Boudin and the whole "are they too light on crime" thing. And that's an issue unto itself. But people are moving back to San Francisco, and that's why the rents are high. And, the only thing that caused them to leave were the lockdowns.
If San Jose had gotten its act together and cut that deal with Google sooner, and the Googleplex was up now, don't you think San Jose would be the magnet?
Yeah, I mean, San Jose was.
I mean, they lost out on a lot of deals here, a lot of renters and income by dragging their feet on this deal.
Right. Well, there's a fan fiction where Google is downtown right now with a giant sparkling campus. Yeah. And the San Francisco, well, let's call them now the real San Jose Giants, are also downtown with a brand new stadium. And San Jose is just the draw of the entire Bay Area. But as we know, that's fiction, because neither of those things have come to fruition. One probably never will.
San Jose has a unique ability to never be able to shed its cowtown attitude on a lot of things.
Sure. Let me correct myself. I said Giants. It would be the A's. The Giants have a brand new stadium.
We have the A's now. They're getting ready. Here was our chance.
Moving or staying, and that's always a hit or miss in Oakland, which is a town that struggles. It's my hometown. But right, San Jose could have had the A's. They should have had Google by now. And for whatever reason, that whole area is still just potentially something. And other than, Adobe and Cisco and some of the smaller companies, San Jose just has not grabbed the brass ring for tech either. And that's why I think, Silicon Valley is in trouble, because San Francisco has all those problems. Do young people want to go there? It's expensive. It's got all its concerns. San Jose doesn't have those concerns, and it's a little less expensive. And yet there's not the culture that the rest of the Bay has, because San Jose grew so quickly with commerce, but it didn't add the culture.
Yeah, and now we're going into a recession again. They're going to have to try to fill all those empty, shiny new buildings over the next few years. I've watched this happen multiple times. I watched San Jose look like it was going to take off, and then they went out and built Valley Fair, and the Mercury News moved out towards Milpitas, and they gutted the town. It'd be nice to have a city council and a mayor that moves swiftly and decisively and takes advantage of being the hottest, one of the hottest business districts on earth. So anyway, that's my Jeremiah for the day. Okay, now let's talk about dragging feet. Chip makers and Congress. I love this headline from the Washington Post that they're playing a $52 billion game of chicken. So we have the chip companies saying, if we don't get some help, we're going to go to Europe. We're delaying the opening of all of our fabs in the U.S., even though we have a chip shortage, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And Congress is saying, well, there's certain things we want in this bill. You've got to take care of certain matters about equity and, environmental stuff and all of that. And it looks like this is coming down to a war. We had the Senate passed it. The House got two different bills and can't decide on which one, or even to agree to the chip money. I mean, this looks like this thing is just going to drag on into the fall. And meanwhile, companies are not going to break ground on their fabs, and that this chip shortage is going to get worse in the next year or two.
Yeah, this surprises me, because it seems like we've, over the last few years, in a country that's so divided, really found things that will unite both Democrats and Republicans, the left and the right. And those are issues of technology, a la privacy concerns of China have united people, and we've gotten things passed. And this chip shortage too, because this means like you say, companies and cars and trucks and things that, America can really hang its hat on. So I predict, I'm a little more optimistic. I think this does get done, a deal gets done. And because I think ultimately, when we take a broad look at what inflation is and how we get out of this, one of the ways we have to do this is to get more cars and trucks on the road, and is to get more. And so you've got the sort of, Republicans who might say, hey, we're building Fords here. And then you've got the Democrats who are saying, hey, we want the EV trucks and cars here. And where does that Venn diagram meet? It meets with
Chips.
Exactly, chips. And so I think this is something that, and granted, me saying I'm encouraged and, unity in the same sentence is very un-American these days. But if there's anything to be encouraged about as far as bringing the two sides together, because we saw this with privacy and security, and I think we will see it again with the chips.
Well, no one seems to be talking about the fact that Moore's law is anti-inflationary. If you're cutting prices 30% a year, that counters a lot of inflationary effects in the economy, and no one's talking about that.
Right. I mean, that's just not going to, can you imagine that coming up in the congressional discussion?
Congress? No, of course not. But I want to see that Wall Street Journal op-ed pointing that out.
Yeah, and that would be good. And it would be anti-inflationary, but I think just even more than that, it would be, positive towards America being competitive with other nations and encouraging Americans to buy American products. And those American products now are, based on chips. You want cars, you want EVs, you need chips. And that's why I think this will eventually, hopefully, cooler heads will prevail, and they'll say, this is what we need to take a step out of the recession.
Well, I hope it happens soon. I mean, look at Global Wafers. Now, that's a major supplier of silicon wafers based in Taiwan. They wanted to build a $5 billion manufacturing plant in Texas. The company's now hinted that it might pivot to South Korea if this CHIP Act is not passed. Great. So maybe we'll be able to make chips. We won't have the wafers to put them on.
We'll see. I mean, that's the kind of thing that spurs action, because people would be so disappointed and say, wait a minute, we lost, an entire facility to South Korea. And this is Texas. So again, this is where you can say, no matter what party you're from, you really want to see those things made here in America. And it's something we haven't seen for a while.
Everybody was talking a few months ago, this is our Sputnik moment for our generation, Well, funny, I remember looking at Sputnik. It was a 3-year-old flying overhead. They were blowing up rockets and everything else for years, and they still forged through and got it done. And you have to wonder, I mean, there's been this complaint that America doesn't know how to get things done anymore.
What we do is we get bogged down in silly arguments, and it's very frustrating. And we're seeing that on a very large level with the Supreme Court now. And again, how divided we are on very, very major issues. And this is one that's not getting as much attention. And no, I don't think people are going to debate Moore's law and the effect on inflation. But I think if we start losing major manufacturing facilities and we're unable to build things here simply because we can't agree, what a letdown that would be.
Kind of apropos of all this, an update to what we were talking about last week. Google says it will delete location history for people who go to abortion clinics. Okay, now here's my question. Do you believe Google? Google has said in the past that it's throwing out all the private information after X number of months. Then it turned out, well, they really hadn't. So do you believe them this time?
I mean, no, not right away. But I think this is an important thing to be said. And much like we tracked those in-house devices, and, it took some good, shoe leather journalism to find out that when they said, no, we don't record any of it. Okay, well, we record some of it, but we don't record all of it. Okay, we record all of it, but we don't store any of it. Okay, we store all of it. And so anyone who buys one of those devices, and I've told everyone possible, do not do this. And I know they're very popular. People don't listen to me. I get it. My job is to be a bit of a Cassandra and to not be listened to. I've come to accept that. But here's another thing we're going to be able to follow up on. And it's important because Google is not a small app. You know, it's not one of those period tracking apps. It's not a little location app. It's Google. It's gigantic. And so if it says, hey, we're making a promise to delete data and keep you safe if you're using us to, find places, that's very important. It can be checked by journalists, by critics, and I hope it will be. But it's also a really big first step, and it tells these smaller companies and apps, this is going to be the expectation now, because there is so much on the line when it comes to privacy. If you so much as take a Uber ride to a Planned Parenthood clinic, there's so much on the line here with our data and our privacy. And so I think if it wants the trust of women, of society, it really needs to come through here. And it's something we'll be able to follow up on. And again, it's Google. People tend to follow Google with their promises as well.
Let me tell you a little story. My oldest son, who you know well, he was working as a barista in a coffee place in Los Altos. And I think you would probably know the one because it was founded by a wife of a Google founder. He was working away, and all of a sudden they locked the front door. They wouldn't allow anybody in. And a few minutes later, the Secret Service showed up and the Google founders showed up. And then guess who showed up? Janet Napolitano. Okay, Homeland Security. Now, why would Homeland Security be having a private meeting with Google? I think we know. I think we've seen the history of government stepping in and saying, you're going to build a trap door here so we can get this information. You're going to do this. You're going to provide us with this. What's to keep that moment from happening again over tracking people going to abortion clinics?
It's a very legitimate question. Remember, the government wanted Apple to build a back door after the, I think, the Pulse shooting, and San Bernardino. And I just think that these relationships between companies that have a lot of government contacts and a lot of lobbyists in DC, and I'm talking about Apple, and I'm talking about Google, I'm talking about Facebook, et cetera, Amazon, et cetera, that's a danger to our privacy. And I'm not saying that Google is, definitely somebody to be trusted. They've proven that they're not. They've worked on that. They've put in effort to not be trusted.
Right.
And you can't deny that. I'm just saying we need companies to come out and say, we're going to respect your privacy on this issue of women's health. And what better company to at least fly the banner first than Google? And we need to track Google. We need to keep them to their word, but also the companies that follow.
Okay, well, as long as we're on privacy, do you see an FCC regulator came out this week and said TikTok should be removed from all app stores in this country, suggesting that the government really feels, we've heard this before, TikTok is a national security threat. And it's gathering data on all these kids using it. Now, meanwhile, TikTok came out and said, we don't do that, and we'll keep all the information on American servers if you like.
Yeah,
Who
TikTok
believes
really
in all
needs,
this? I mean,
TikTok
China
really,
has a reputation,
Right.
and
Right. And it is collecting a lot of data. TikTok really needs to make a move to prove that there is a separation between its ownership and its sort of, I guess, American, it's American, what would you call it, ownership here.
right.
And that they can prove that the data done, and put on there and the dances and all that stuff and its data are stored on American servers, because there is that concern. And this actually goes back to the Trump administration. Remember, Trump was so anti-media and technology that I think this got lost in the shuffle. But he was in office saying you cannot trust TikTok. And now years later, people are saying the same thing. And it is I think a legitimate concern, and it was a legitimate concern. And this is a company that really has taken over. I mean, it's, I think, a big reason for Netflix's struggles, and the reason
busiest app in the world right now, right?
And my goodness, I mean, the potential value here is just enormous.
I should throw in 3.5 billion downloads.
Yeah, but if it cannot prove that, the Chinese government is not looking at your kids' data and information and all that stuff when they put videos up there, they're going to have trouble monetizing. They're going to have trouble gaining any sort of a foothold here permanently. And so it really has an opportunity, and I think a responsibility, to show us that there is a separation between.
And it's going to be hard to prove that separation. They can say, oh, we're hands off completely. But if you look at a lot of American companies in China, they've been forced to include somebody on their board of directors who's usually the son of a party member. You know, there's that sort of, China has to have a finger in every pie, the government.
Well, right.
So how do you purge all that too?
Yeah, but it's a different kind of thing because I mean, Apple has huge dealings in China. Obviously, all these companies do. But by and by, I think they get a little bit of a pass because they're American companies.
Yeah.
And I don't know if this is bias or, xenophobia, whatever it is, but they get a bit of a pass. TikTok does not because it's originally a Chinese company and that's where it's headquartered. And so that's why I think you saw those efforts. And they didn't pan out, but by companies like Microsoft and Oracle to not only take a stake, but maybe even take an ownership stake and to say, hey, yeah, they do business over there. We all do, but it's owned here. And until that happens, I think the privacy advocates are correctly going to be extra concerned about TikTok.
We're going to run out of time, but real quick, the average American kid spends 46 minutes a day on TikTok. That's a sizable presence in the United States and penetration into the youth market.
Absolutely. I've seen it firsthand. And it's what the web guys like to call sticky. People stick to it. They stay there for a long time. And that's why it's taking over from the other streaming and downloadable stuff. It's just a dominant force right now.
Okay, real quick, Microsoft's $69 billion acquisition of Activision is running into real obstacles in the UK. They're going to try to stop this thing over there. I don't think they'll have a chance, but we'll see. And finally, you sent me this one. This was interesting. GameStop, the ultimate meme stock. I mean, God, remember covering this a year ago and the insanity around it and all those basement stockbrokers speculating and driving the stock price up. Well, they've just rewarded, if you call it rewarded, those who've been holding the stock. Did anybody hold the stock? All those 5 people that held on to GameStop stock have now been rewarded with a 4-to-1 stock split.
Yeah, and that just says something. I mean, GameStop was left for dead before it became.
Oh, yeah, no, it was dead man walking.
Right, and it was a hardware play in a software world. It was actual physical stores in a downloadable world. It was just hanging on, and then it became this hot, sexy meme stock. And it's so interesting because when you split 4 for 1, obviously it doesn't directly affect the value, but it shows a lot of optimism going forward, which meme stocks don't have. Meme stocks have optimism in the absolute present only right now. They don't think about what's going to happen in the future. But again, also you're putting all those extra shares on the market, which is a way to stabilize things. And so GameStop has gone from an era, a very brief era of the opposite of stabilization. Hey, let these things fly, hold on for dear life. Everybody, buy and hold. And all of a sudden they're making a play to say, hey, we'll have more shares out there. It'll be less volatile, and we will reward the long-term shareholders, like you said, assuming there are some out there.
I would love to hear the story of people that experience a stock split thinking this is it. I've got 4 times as many shares, and then the stock price goes down. I mean, that seems to be like the ultimate Silicon Valley tragedy. I mean, you just have the heights of hubris and then boom, you're wiped out.
Right. And this, GameStop's fundamentals, I would argue, aren't exactly 4-to-1 Splitsville. I think it's high stock prices because people are still excited about the meme-ification of GameStop. But hey, let's give them a little time here. They're spreading out the shares. They're doing something that makes trading a little more stable. And who knows, maybe GameStop will start to get into, maybe it will become that sort of, mythical Netflix of gaming that we've talked about. Who knows?
Right. And you could think now you could buy into a black hole at 1/4 the price.
Exactly.
Finally, ding, 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 ding. We have a winner. just Chinese authorities are trying to hide it, but a guy named China Dan has apparently hacked social media in China for 1 billion Chinese citizens' personal data. I believe that's a new record now, 1 billion. He got it from a police database in Shanghai, and he's offered to sell it. It's 23 terabytes of private information.
Isn't that how thieves are caught, when they sell the goods?
Yeah.
And cybersecurity is just it's so fraught all over the world. And we just talked about people loading up their stuff on TikTok. And would they ever, when they're doing that, even consider the idea that, I don't know, China Dan or whoever this is out there plucking their data and selling it in the global market? I mean, you just have to be careful, folks.
You talk about scaling, but one guy, 1 billion files. There's the future, ladies and gentlemen. And on that happy note, that's it for now. You can find us on the Silicon Valley Business Journal homepage, as well as on Spotify, Anchor, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcast, LinkedIn, and check out our YouTube page. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.